Welcome to the Volteface podcast. I'm Paul North, I'm director at Volteface, and I'm joined by
Katya Kowalski, head of operations at Volteface.
And Jackson, head of policy and public affairs at Volteface.
Good Volteface representation.
Well, yeah, well done, Volteface. This is nice, Jay. Nice to have you on a podcast.
Pleasure to be here. I've always wanted to do this.
We're talking about Liz Truss and what Liz Truss means for cannabis reform and wider drug policy reform, which loads of people have spoke to us about recently and asked us, whether it be online or in meetings and stuff, and it feels like a really important question to explore over the next hour. So let's just get straight into it. Let's think about specifically Liz Truss, what she's about, her background, what she represents. I'll let you kick things off, Jay, because you care deeply about politics and embed yourself in it thoroughly. So what's your kind of main takes on Liz Truss being Prime Minister of the UK?
Yeah, I think when it comes to drug policy reform, it is sort of emblematic of a wider issue, which I think is really interesting about Liz Truss's premiership, which is when ideology meets office. So obviously, I think we know Liz Truss is probably, I think you could quite certainly say she's quite a sort of ideological politician. She's got that conviction. She's got quite a long history of being, a libertarian, like a classical liberal, stretching back to her Liberal Democrat days, her time in the think tank world, and, writing Britannia Unchained with various other current Tory MPs. So I think unlike Boris Johnson, who is a bit of a political shapeshifter, she's got that sort of quite distinctive political identity. And
how would you describe that? How would you describe a political identity? Yeah, it's sort of like a classical libertarian.
Classical liberal, yeah. Libertarian. And which I think is the same for a lot of the Conservative Party nowadays. And it's about how well she can sort of enact that agenda, those policies when you actually get into office. Because the pressures, the stresses and strains of being Prime Minister, obviously so difficult, and there's so many things, especially on her plate at the moment with the Ukraine cost of living crisis, NHS backlogs, etc., that sometimes what you wanted to do can just get lost.
Big time
in events. So I think with drug policy, I think it probably is fair to say that with her and people who are working around her who've come from a think tank world, you'd probably suggest that they are sort of ideologically predisposed to be, positive towards particularly things like the legalisation of cannabis recreationally.
Well,
but it's about whether that survives the office.
I mean, she's campaigned for it directly as an individual with the Lib Dems, right? So if you really zone in on Liz Truss as an individual, she's campaigned for legalisation of cannabis.
Yeah, she's also said the opposite, to be fair. In an Enemy interview, I think in 2001, before the general election, she was like, I actually don't agree with this anymore. But I think out of the two, that's more likely to be that was probably a political choice.
Yeah, when was that? 2001?
I think so, yeah. Don't quote me on that. But
yeah, but then I guess it depends how she'll actually act in office. Like you said, obviously kind of paper to practice and beliefs to what can actually be done feasibly right now, given the kind of mess of a political climate that the UK is in at the moment.
But look, so far, just looking at what we know about the mini budget, that's, for us is upcoming tomorrow, but I guess for everyone else who's listened to us, has already happened. So far, ideology is definitely sort of winning. She's said repeatedly she's willing to take decisions that she think might make her unpopular because she thinks they're the right thing to do. Not obviously all politicians would say that, but she's actually doing it. Boris Johnson very much and Keir Starmer probably wouldn't do anything that would make them unpopular, whereas Liz Truss with these bankers bonuses stuff, the stamp duty cut, all these things that she thinks will do well for the UK and will make her unpopular. Drug policy reform is obviously slightly different, particularly questions around cannabis, because it's not an unpopular policy. That would be something she could do that I think she is ideologically sort of agreeable to, and that the public like. And, as we'll talk about later, has various benefits that particularly the Conservative Party could latch onto in terms of Brexit and economic growth. But yeah, I think it's just the drug policy reform questions, particularly around cannabis, are really interesting in that respect.
Yeah, I agree. So she as an individual does feel a little bit different to previous prime ministers because she's in this kind of weird... We were talking about it on the tube, weren't we, earlier, Jay? Which was far too loud when we were being deafened by the tube that they need to fix.
Yeah.
But we're saying that, she's basically got a period of time pre-election where she can do a bunch of things. She can be bold. She can kind of introduce a whole bunch of policies which fit within her ideological positioning and just kind of see what comes with regards to the next election. And she's definitely sticking to that ideology with regards to the economic policy, like big cuts. Do you think there, up to both of you, do you think there is any chance of cannabis being we'll stick with cannabis for the second. Cannabis reform being something she talks about before the election? Like honest opinions. I'll make sure you're talking to me, because you guys haven't got headphones. You know you
Can't hear myself. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but just talking it.
I feel like it's probably quite unlikely pre-election, just because given everything that's going on in the UK and the amount of basically the political climate we're in at the moment, I think it's quite unlikely that we're going to see cannabis being introduced as like a core policy. Over the last few years, it's been so difficult to campaign and get politicians interested in recreational cannabis reform specifically, given Brexit, COVID, war in Ukraine, cost of living crisis, death of Queen Elizabeth. Like it's just it's been back to back unprecedented times. And as much as cannabis reform obviously fits into wider socio-political and economic policies, I don't think it's seen that way kind of in wider politics.
What do you think?
Yeah, I very much agree with that. I don't see how they've got the legislative sort of time and the legislative agenda to pursue any serious like reforms in this area. You've got 18 months probably till an election, 2 years max, you'd imagine. And by the time they've dealt with all this cost of living stuff, they haven't got time, unless she's going to do it by the back door, because we know Liz Truss likes to do things through the back door. She's not going to. I don't think there's any realistic prospect of getting any serious change before the next election. So that throws up the question of, well, is it going to be in the next manifesto, which I think is probably the single most sort of the thing we can hope for the most, because if she pursues this sort of classical liberal, this agenda that's very much about her and her beliefs, you can see that she's going to go into the next election not with a focus group that's going to, with a manifesto that's going to be a focus group to death. It's going to be a manifesto that's true blue, is all about hers and her beliefs. And I think, you could definitely see a sort of proposal to legalise cannabis being in there. This has long been talk in the political world that, I wrote that article during the Tory leadership contest about the various leadership contenders. And it's long been thought that she's been the best prospect for it, that you can imagine. I've literally heard this exact scenario talked about before, I can't remember who, saying that, look, the Tories come out of office, Keir Starmer wins the next election after the Tories have messed up the economy, let's say. And then there's a manifesto next time. There's a manifesto like this time when she's facing Keir Starmer, that either Keir Starmer wins and he gets to sort out the mess, or she can do a true blue manifesto that has things like cannabis reform in it, as something that she can use to signal to Tory party members and to voters to say, look, I do have a liberal streak. You might think of me as a Tory or an authoritarian or whatever, but it's some proper, like, in the same way that people have been talking about Operation Save Big Dog to save Boris Johnson, the red meat that was thrown around to Tory backbenchers to save him. I think a proposal like that on cannabis would be like a sort of some red meat to the sort of classical liberal.
Yeah, I can see that. What my takes, I know you're both desperate for it, is that like I think Liz Truss is obviously quite new in, right? And the Queen died after she shook her hand, so like there's not really a great deal of time for us to like adjust ourselves to what she means as a Prime Minister. No media coverage, like the Parliament's been shut. So we've not been that exposed to her.
Yeah, there hasn't been a great deal of ways for her to like prove herself.
No,
as to what
like none.
Like. Yeah,
she shook the hand of the Queen. A day later the Queen died, and then like literally 2 days out. I think what we're going to see is I think what people don't appreciate about Liz Truss, and I know this from my exposure to people that work with her and the groups that are around her, is she is a bit of a character. Like she doesn't care that she's not really that bothered about what the people think.
Yeah, I mean Dominic Cummings called her a human hand grenade.
Yeah, I think that's a fair. I think that's a yeah. Human hand grenade.
Yeah,
she is. I think she's smarter than people think she is. I think people see her and think
she's very hard working. Apparently,
yeah, works hard.
Studious.
I think she's smart. People might disagree vehemently with her ideology and position. That's fine.
I do.
But all right, Jay, this is a political podcast. But thanks for sharing. But I think she's got that streak in her where she can just do a thing. Like she scrapped sugar tax within days without any it was just like, yeah, sugar tax, that's sod that. Right, bankers bonus tax, like taxation on bankers bonuses, get rid of that. The budget that's coming out tomorrow is aggressive. Like it's a lively budget that's going to stress people out because it's radical in its reforms. So if you think like historically over the past like 10 years of governance that we've had, 15 years, there's, energy crisis, economic crisis. I think I wouldn't be you guys are making sensible points, but I wouldn't be absolutely gobsmacked if someone spoke to Liz Truss about cannabis reform and she said, well, Germany doing it, Canada doing it, America doing it. I don't see why we shouldn't follow in those footsteps.
I just don't think there's time to do it though. Like, look at Germany.
No, I'm not saying, no, I'm not.
So
Listen, she's not going to introduce it and do it before the next election. I'm talking about like a willful intent to say,
that's
we're
what
behind.
Manifesto is for, right? You put it in your manifesto. You say, I'm going to do this. You put it in your manifesto.
Yeah. I think that scenario is not crazy. I think someone could interview her, speak to her. She could go on Tom Howard, and could be like, what do you think of cannabis legalisation? And I can genuinely see Liz Truss saying something like, Germany are doing it, Canada have done it, the US are doing it. I think we should, why are we behind?
I mean, I don't think it's likely that we'll see that it's a priority for her given the climate, but I don't think it's certainly not impossible, and she's probably the best bet to bring it forward out of the Tory party.
Yeah, in a long time.
She's surrounded by characters like Ruth Porter, Sophie Jarvis, Matt Sinclair.
Yeah, these are all IEA, ASI.
They're formal advisors.
Illumina,
people who are informally advising her, who, again, are all from that sort of tough industry.
Taxpayers Alliance, the Institute of Economic Affairs, Adam Smith Institute, all organisations that take a similar position to us, like legalise and reform cannabis. And they've all got influential positions and the ear of Liz Truss. I just think the debate has got to put, it's just not that. Once you frame it as an economic issue, in the context of what's going on globally with regards to the economies and interest rates and everything, I just think we're at an opportune moment for someone like Liz Truss to talk about it, and it'd be fairly well received within that economic framing. And the whole Germany is legalising, why shouldn't we?
Yeah, so I agree with that, but I think that sort of nicely brings us on to one of the problems that I sort of think could derail that sort of talk, which is the Home Office. So, I didn't...
Well, not those guys.
I don't think we actually thought it could get any worse than the Home Office under Priti Patel, but Suella Braverman, the new Home Secretary, is, I'd say, definitely worse than Priti Patel, which is quite the feat, really. And I think it's not even necessarily just about Suella Braverman. I think there's a real sense that the Home Office, just as an institution, and so many people have got so many criticisms about the Home Office, about Windrush, policing and things like that. But when it comes to drugs, it really isn't fit for purpose, and it seems to be almost sort of institutionally averse to any progressive thinking on drug policy. You only need to look at the white paper that was released recently, that clearly has come from America. It's come from this behavioural science sort of stuff, and it's been put through this sort of machine of the Home Office, and it's been toughened up and beefed up. I can't remember the adjectives that it's from.
Consequences.
Yeah.
When it's tough consequences, when it's actually diversion.
Yeah.
Less tough consequences.
Yeah, and
semantics.
And the framing around it is all just very odd, and I think same with this new guy Jeremy Quinn, who's the new drugs minister, who's taken over from Kit Malthouse. I don't know anyone who knows anything about him. I text all my contacts saying, this guy, what's he about? And people who are very clued up in the know, being like, I've literally never heard of this guy. So
yeah, it's quite random.
The only thing I know about him is that he backed Rishi Sunak in the leadership election. So Liz Truss, while she's axed all sort of Rishi Sunak backers at a cabinet minister level, including Grant Shapps, who she said was the best communicator in government and one of the best secretaries of state, she was like, there's no room at the inn for you because you backed Rishi. She's been given lower ministerial rank jobs to Rishi supporters to try and appease people. So I imagine he's probably just an appeasement hire, basically. He's just
quite possibly
because he backed Rishi.
Go back a bit there, like Suella Braverman. What is it about her policies and positions that's caused you concern? Not just for cannabis, but generally for drug policy.
When she was Attorney General, she personally intervened in a case of a drug driver. I forget the details now, but I think she got his sentence doubled. It's in, again, plug. It's in my article that I wrote.
I'll put it in the description.
The Tory leadership candidates on drugs that I wrote during the leadership contest. I think she doubled his sentence. Like, she appealed to whoever you appealed to because she thought the sentence was too lenient. She's also done the classic thing like Boris Johnson and Priti Patel, going out on police raids, dressing up in the police gear. She's praised drug busts in Parliament, I think, and things like that. It's all just bad vibes, basically. So I have very little hope for her.
Interesting if that's why, to go back to my point around Truss, I think that's why it's so crucial that reform can only really go through under like an economic angle. Because in many ways it's not. I don't know how much that debate and discussion is even to do with the Home Office. If this is about innovation, jobs, economy, global trade, keeping up with everybody else, It doesn't really feel like a Home Office discussion. If it's about crime, policing, then yeah, sure. And I'm not saying that those parts of the argument will disappear. That, as we see any country that legalises, it's a central part of the debate. But if the framing of the discussion, like, I guess the point I'm trying to make is the Home Office are somewhat protected if the discussion is around the economy.
Yeah, if it's
Do you know what I mean?
not framed
Like
and
she could say,
discussed as if it's not framed and discussed as a criminal issue in the first place, then I don't know. I think the Home Office could still kick off, but yeah, if it's focused very much on an economic,
yeah, it's like jobs, innovation, economy. Everyone else is doing it.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is I don't think any proposal to legalise cannabis recreation is going to come from the Home Office.
I think that's a fair reflection. Yeah, I think that's.
It would have to come from Liz Truss and her policy team. She's apparently got a slimmed down policy team compared to previous iterations of that number 10 policy unit. And, you know, one of the things that I think was really holding back prospects for drug policy reform previously was the composition of Boris Johnson's sort of policy team in number 10. So people like Munira Mirza and her husband, Dougie someone, I think his name is, can't remember. But they were like proper culture warriors. They were the ones who were properly pursuing the culture wars. So I imagine they were sort of very, against drug reform. So I think, I guess what I'm saying is the Home Office, even though I think I probably agree that the Home Office isn't where drug policy should sit, ultimately, we don't have much hope for anything good coming out of there. And obviously one thing that we are sort of waiting on is the NOS sort of ACMD review that was, I think it was Pretty Patel sort of instigated it last year. I mean, they only did one a couple of years ago, but I'm imagining we'll be getting the results from that at some point soon. I wouldn't be surprised if the ACMD said the exact same thing as last time, which is sort of broadly the legislation is right. So I think at the moment it's illegal to supply it for recreational use, but obviously it's incredibly difficult to enforce that. Incredibly ineffective piece of legislation.
Yeah, given it's used for
coffee shops, in a million coffee shops up and down the country. Yeah.
You can't exactly make it illegal for all use.
No. So, but I wouldn't be surprised. I guess what I'm saying is if they got this report and back and actually just said, well, you know what, we're just gonna whatever it is, either outlaw it fully, which would be ridiculous, or some other sort of punitive
no more cream
nonsense. I guess that'll be an interesting touch. It'll be an interesting test case.
Just to Liz Truss as a discussion point. So like I think we've outlined some some perceptions around what it means for cannabis reform. I think there's an opportunity there. I think it's interesting. I always said through the leadership campaign, Liz is the one that
she's the one hope.
She's the hope for like adult use recreational. I think medical. I don't think Tories are going to touch medical. I think it's come to the thing we spoke about the last podcast as like there's just a bit of
there's too much
gridlock.
Of a gridlock.
So yeah, we're not going to get political intervention there.
Medical, especially with Therese Coffey as health secretary. This is a woman who, is not. I don't think would be sort of
progressive.
Yeah, I mean, she's obviously not progressive.
to be politically correct.
Who's like, on the record saying I'm anti-abortion, and like, give her a due that she was like, I wouldn't change the law on that. Whether I believe her or not, I don't know. But yeah, I certainly don't think she's sort of well disposed to widening access to cannabis. She probably just sees cannabis and freaks.
I get that, but Liz. So that's kind of. I think Liz Truss and cannabis reform is very interesting.
Yeah,
it's very interesting. I think we should keep an eye on it, and I think we should definitely acknowledge the people that are close to Liz and her team.
That's the best.
Like that. Like I think that's and her strength of character in some ways to just be like, this is my position, it's my ideology. Definitely. I don't really care. She's clearly just going to
unpopular though. If it was
yeah. Well, that's the thing. That's the thing.
If it was a contentious issue amongst the public, but it's really not, and polling continues to show that.
Yeah. So I think we've done a good job of outlining the elements of positivity we have. We've highlighted some concerns, which we'll go into more detail, but we've highlighted some of the positivity with cannabis. But what do you think to just wider drug reform with Liz Truss? So, just drug consumption rooms, like all the other areas of drug policy, decriminalisation.
Drug checking.
What do you think? Because Jay, I know we spoke about this previously, but...
I mean, like we were just saying, medical cannabis, I think, is a no-go. I can't see anything changing on that front. I like you guys have sort of touched on, the logjam is so complicated and the reasons behind it are so, difficult that I don't necessarily think it is a top-down thing that needs to happen there anyway.
Yeah, I think it's a bit too complex for politicians to really kind of wrap their head around and comprehend.
Yeah.
Given it is such a medical issue and they see it as like, okay, well, we changed the law, we made that legislation, it's kind of up to
they're not going to touch it.
Not like we said, NOS I'm not hopeful for. I think Priti Patel sort of, there was talk about cracking down, never actually really happened, but I definitely can imagine Suella Braverman picking up the mantle on that one. Harm reduction things, yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because you had Priti Patel's Home Office, sanctioning things like, the Loop setting up their regular drug checking service in Bristol, which is something that, you couldn't imagine them doing. I couldn't imagine them doing, I was surprised. So it's a difficult one. Instinctively, I think when it comes to other questions of drug policy reform, I'm less hopeful than about recreational cannabis. Like, I don't see that Liz Truss's ideology would make her necessarily favourable to things like drug consumption rooms or drug checking or...
Not my... I mean, there is a broader, like libertarianism would be supportive of, like, personal choice and freedom. So, like, if you want to use drugs and take a... there is a part of it where he's fairly relaxed about that, but I don't think there's enough energy there.
Is one thing, and then overdose prevention centre.
I don't feel particularly hopeful about wider drug reform in the context of I do for cannabis, adult use cannabis, recreational.
Psilocybin.
I just think it's.
I feel like psilocybin's something that's seen more as like that medical.
Yeah, I'm talking medical.
Issue.
Yeah.
So it's.
Because obviously we know Crispin and the CDPIG are big on that, and you'd imagine that they may have a new go at talking to people about that. But
yeah,
I just don't know what reform is really needed. Like, I think medical trials, evidence, information, evidence and research.
A lot about rescheduling, but not in regards to recreational use, but for medical.
For more research.
Yeah, and I feel like within the drug reform debate and discussion, there is that need to kind of separate recreational from medical, both for cannabis but for psychedelics as well, because I think it is two different kind of discussion points. And if it has like medical potential to treat, treatment resistant conditions, I can see a lot of people being able to get on board with that. But letting people take magic mushrooms in their free time, that's, I don't know. I feel like that's still a contentious issue that
even though that was legal until so recently, but yeah, I think was it New Labour that outlawed that in the end? I think, I'm not sure.
What do you think Labour would do if the Tories took a positive stance on adult use recreational?
I think they'd take a negative stance.
You think they'd just revert to like great? What framing?
He's the opposer in chief. That's his. I think he would see it as. I think he would use it. I might. It's so difficult, isn't it? I think instinctively, if Liz Truss came out and said, next manifesto, or said in this parliament we want to scope it out and then we'll put it in the next manifesto for you guys to vote on, and if you vote us in, we'll do it. Which I think is probably the best we could ask for, is that they start making positive noises now. They set up a commission looking into it, looking at Germany, looking at Luxembourg, Malta, Canada, etc. If she said that, I reckon Keir Starmer would oppose it.
Yeah, they'd go the other way, wouldn't they? They'd be like, corporations, you're going to put it in the hands of profit.
Keir Starmer, Deborah Mattinson, the whole like pervasive red wall focus group stuff that drives Labour, that makes them so sort of insipid and boring. I think he would see it as like, I think he'd jump on it. I think he'd actually love it if Liz just came out for that, because I think he'd go, great, we'll scoop up all the red wall voters who don't like cannabis, which we know.
Which we know isn't true. Like, so it wouldn't happen. That might be his instinct.
No, but it doesn't matter. That's what they think. I think they can't be shifted out of that mindset now. I think they're too far down. They've drunk Kool-Aid when it comes to the red wall.
Yeah.
So
even though there's literally polling that has been done that shows the absolute opposite.
Yeah, but I don't think. Yeah.
Which is, I feel like it's another example of how evidence doesn't convince anyone.
Yeah, no, it really doesn't, does it? Evidence is borderline useless.
Keir Starmer's whole thing is that I'm law and order guy.
Yeah. He said that really weird thing, didn't he, about like...
Mr. Rules, that's what Lisa and Andy called him. He was Mr. Rules.
Mr. Rules. Didn't he say something about like, oh yeah, I wouldn't ever legalise cannabis because I saw how many people... through the court system, I saw how many people were like arrested. Yeah. It's like, well, yeah, that's the point of changing the law.
Yeah, he made a really eloquent case on LBC against what he was talking.
It's like, it's really bad because like I've worked in the court system and saw all the arrests. It's like,
well, this is the thing.
That's why we need to change it. Like,
so we don't arrest people.
Yeah, this is the thing I've said so many times. It's criminal, really, because he's in such a unique position as a Labour leader who has that experience on the criminal justice side to say, look, I've seen this. I know how much misery these cannabis prosecutions cause. Let's change it. And I think he would have that sort of capital, that law and order capital, that political capital with voters. And they'd be like, you know what, fine. He knows, he's seen it. And he's wasting that. And I think it is disgraceful. It's shocking. It's
really frustrating, isn't it? I'm not going to go into too much about this because I've ranted about it before, but like it's really frustrating when our political system is less about, your ideology and what you actually believe in, and more how can you position yourself to like gain ground over the other party,
Well, that's
rather than
Starmer to a T,
what
yeah.
do we care about and believe in. Which is why it's interesting that he's now paired up against Liz Truss, that I still don't think many people truly understand yet, who is someone who is like, I don't really care what people think. Like, I was literally speaking to someone the other day who was close to Truss, who was like, a lot of the discussions and meetings where things are being put on the table, and they're saying, oh, you should maybe not do this or that bit. She's saying, I don't care. We're going to do that. We're going to do that thing. I want to do that. You know, go away. We're going to say that and do that. Which is interesting, because we haven't had a politician like that for a while against Starmer. Do you know what I mean? He had Johnson. And
Yeah, I wouldn't say you had a politician, a prime minister like that, probably since David Cameron and George Osborne. But then, you know, the thing that they did sort of their sort of big thing, their big project, austerity, that wasn't something they would have got pushback from the Treasury on anyway, really.
Yeah.
So yeah, you struggle to think of someone who has that conviction and then is using it to push back against that sort of the institutional force for a while. You know, probably not since Tony Blair, I'd say, which is a really interesting point. Yeah. And that's why I think Starmer would be flummoxed if Liz Truss did come out of it. And then this makes me now think about the Lib Dems as well, which is something we've talked about a lot.
oh man, what is going on with the Lib Dems? Yeah, can we talk about Lib Dems?
No, it does matter, because it's contextual, isn't it? The challenge for Labour and the Lib Dems has changed now because they're up against Liz Truss instead of Boris Johnson. So it gives them space to move on things that they couldn't move on before, and gives them less space to talk about things that they previously were talking a lot about. And I think with the Lib Dems, with cannabis, which is obviously something they've had in a lot of their, I don't know exactly how many, but I think the last 3, let's say, manifestos.
Yeah, at least.
Is something that they had sort of inconspicuously dropped. We'd sort of gathered, haven't we, from people that we talked to.
Well, yeah, it's like an ongoing chat with us, isn't it? We're trying to work it out.
Yeah.
My gut instinct is
obviously, it was a big thing under Joe Swinson. Then Ed Davey sort of dropped it a bit. I don't actually know what his position
was. Ed Davey the really Christian
That's Tim
one?
Farron.
Oh, okay. I said that's too early, didn't I?
No, Ed Davey's the guy who's there now.
Right.
Very sort of proper guy, you know, wears a suit and tie, says the right things. But they're sort of trying to win back the blue wall. You know, they can see Chesham and Amersham. Was it North Shropshire? Yeah. The string of orange-blue by-elections that they won over the last couple of years, the blue wall is where they're going to win back these seats. You know, I think the idea is Labour and the Lib Dems work together. Labour take back parts of the red wall. Lib Dems take back bits of the blue wall, and you eat the Tory coalition from both sides, and you go into government as a coalition. I think that's sort of broadly the strategy I can imagine that's being pursued at the top level of both parties. And cannabis reform sort of ultimately, I think, got a bit ditched in that pursuit, because the Lib Dems thought, right, we need to win back the blue wall. Cannabis reform probably not going to go back down great in the shires, you know.
And they lost one of their best advocates, Norman Lamb, best politician, I would argue. I'm biased because I've spent time with him. He's a wonderful man, but like he's such a superb advocate for sensible cannabis reform, and I feel like they've tactically pushed it to the back, which is super frustrating, because let's say there is a Labour Lib Dem coalition, I don't feel like they're campaigning hard enough on cannabis legalisation to have that at the table.
Lib Dems.
So do you remember we had that chat the other day about the difference between coalition governments and the UK government, where we have like a 2-party system, essentially. I know there's obviously other parties, but whereas that like coalition style governments like in Germany, where you can go like, okay, cool, there's like 3 parties, we've got a majority together. Me and you don't really care about cannabis legalisation, but you really do. So you say, I'm only coming on board if this is on the table. And we go,
yeah. So
Germany, like these,
was it the Greens? It was in So it's the Greens, the SDP and the FDP, the sort of pro-business party. They're in the coalition together, I think. And then obviously it must have been the Greens who were like, right, we'll do this. This is on the table. Same as in 2010 with the coalition.
There's a bunch of things. Yeah,
we're like, you know, this is a red line for us. You know, in that case, it was a referendum on alternative voting. But yeah, I think you're right. In a situation where Starmer and the Liberal Democrats are trying to form a government, I can't see a red line for the Liberal Democrats being legalised cannabis.
Which is really annoying, because it could be, but it wasn't
a core policy for so long.
It's been a core policy for ages, and
it's been ditched.
Yeah, well, I don't know. We think it's been ditched.
If you know whether it has or hasn't, please do get in touch.
Leave in the comments.
We've been told it's maybe not been ditched, but it's not in the conference programme. But then it's not always in the conference programme also.
And no one's talking about it.
And no one's talking about it. It's not like a key.
But I guess the point I was sort of making was Liz Truss now is different in the sense that she's more popular in the Red Wall, I think, than Boris Johnson was. You know, we saw throughout the leadership contest that Liz Wall Trust higher, Liz Truss polled higher in the red wall with amongst Tory members. We're talking here than Rishi Sunak did. Rishi Sunak was backed by the sort of true blue wall Tories. Liz Truss got a lot more support in the red wall areas. So I think what that would suggest is that Labour have maybe got a bit of a tougher fight on their hands in the red wall now, but the Liberal Democrats will probably see Liz Truss's, ascending to the throne, to the premiership. Not the throne, that's Charles. Not Liz the
Game of Thrones.
Liz Truss coming into office as an even bigger opportunity for them to win back seats in the blue wall, which makes me just think they're probably going to double down on their strategy of whatever they've been doing thus far, because thus far they've been trying to win back the blue wall, and now they've got an even bigger chance at winning those seats back. I think they'll probably just become even more cautious and go, right, let's just focus everything on that.
Yeah.
So I'm not super hopeful about how Liz Truss becoming Prime Minister affects chances amongst Labour or the Lib Dems either, really, unfortunately. Not to sound like a doomster and a gloomster, but...
That's right, just being honest. What about the party generally? Like, so we've got...
The Conservatives.
Yeah, so there's a tension, isn't it? So you have... The challenge we have with governments and leaders, obviously, is they come in with a particular ideological position, and we know from the Tory party that's fairly... it's not massively diverse, it's a little bit diverse. Like, that leadership contest, Liz was certainly more of the, libertarian vibe of the party.
Yeah.
But
she didn't win very overwhelmingly in the end. It was all she's 30 points ahead. She's 30 points ahead, and then she won by 15 points. Whatever.
Yeah. But there's always a tension between the Prime Minister or the leader of the party and the backbenches.
Yeah.
And there is certainly tension among social conservatives around the concept of drug policy reform, cannabis reform.
Do you think it's sorry, go on.
No, if you're going to speak, make sure
do you think that drug policy reform for people, for Tory members, for Tory voters, comes under the culture wars? Is it an issue of woke, or is it separate to that? Because I don't think it actually is. I don't think people, when people think of woke, they rally against the woke ideology and they're snowflakes. They don't.
That'd be a good way to get the Tories to support. If you could make the illicit nature, if you could somehow make the illegality of cannabis a woke issue, the Tories would be like, it's disgraceful, legalise it. But I don't know how you could do that.
But woke, they think about statues and they think about trans rights and things like that. I don't think people actually think drug policy is a woke issue. I don't know.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I wouldn't associate it immediately. I think it still remains a very moral issue.
Yeah.
We were talking about earlier today, but no.
I don't think they see it as woke. I think they might do if Labour gripped it more.
It is progressive. It is ultimately a progressive.
But it's not a societal thing. It's not a culture thing.
But it is progressive, and drug policy is a social justice issue. I think we're all agreed on that. But there is also a very easily put, compelling case for specifically legal recreational cannabis, which is one of the things we were going to talk about actually. Yeah. So Tom Harwood was literally tweeting about it earlier today.
We mentioned his name and then he tweeted about it.
Yeah, I know, it was mad. It was like I summoned him like a genie. Yeah.
In a positive way, if Tom catches wind of this, it's like a really nice comment.
There's so many easy points. We've said this for ages. I've got Torrin from Centre coming on a podcast in a couple of weeks to talk about the centrist case for drug reform. Obviously, we all understand the sort of progressive case, but there's such a strong conservative case. One of the things that I've been thinking about, a good article in The Guardian, I think it was last week, about the struggles that Germany's facing in terms of their attempts to legalise cannabis recreationally, is that it's coming into sort of direct conflict with EU laws. So stuff about Schengen, Commission, I think, directives and, all this stuff. So there's a really easy frame there for British politicians to be like, look, this is a Brexit opportunity. Jacob Rees-Mogg, under the previous administration, Brexit Opportunities Minister, searching out for Brexit opportunities like needles in a haystack, trying to find anything that could possibly positive come from Brexit. And this is a blazingly obvious one, no pun intended.
Had that one prepared.
I genuinely didn't. So that strength is a really easy frame. Obviously, at the moment, the government, the whole thing is growth. Kwasi Kwarteng went on his first day in the Treasury, sacked Tom Scholar, said that the thing, our main purpose as a government is to get trend growth to 2.5%. Legalising cannabis creates so many, I'm sure you talk about this at length, economic opportunities, jobs, investment, things like that. It would be such.
It's definitely I think it's more a Tory thing than it is a Labour thing, just because of the diversity of areas that the subject represents. But what I guess my line of inquiry is, how do you think Liz Truss is going to interact with those backbenchers around the issue? Because ultimately the relationship with Prime Minister and the backbenchers is really fundamental in taking the party into a direction that might feel uncomfortable. I mean, she did, I know you say it was 50% or whatever, but it was fairly comfortable of a win.
It was the least comfortable of any Tory leadership election ever that's had the membership.
Oh, fair.
It wasn't.
I felt like from the outside we knew she was going to be leader for like ages.
No,
like,
I know,
it wasn't like, oh man, this is really close. It could be either. It was
No.
like, oh, Liz has won.
Yeah, I agree.
Like-
No, as soon as she got into the final two, I think everyone was operating on the sort of basis that she was going to win. And sure, it's probably partially the expectation effect, but I'm just saying it wasn't super.
Yeah, she's not like the most popular Tory politician
No.
of
She's
all time in the
divisive
party.
within the party. Yeah, 100%. We've already seen sort of briefings coming from backbenchers this week talking about she spurned all her goodwill because of the way that she sacked people and things like that. But when it comes to the backbenchers, she's got a majority of, I think Boris Johnson had 80. I think it's down to about 70 now because they've had various people resign or be put in prison or whatever. So she's still got a sizable, chunky majority. It's pretty thick. And sure, she needs to have a better relationship with her backbenchers than Boris Johnson did. Sophie Jarvis, your good friend, she's her political secretary as far as I'm aware. And so that'll be her job. It'll be her job to manage the relations with the Parliamentary Conservative Party. A very tough job. The Parliamentary Conservative Party. I can't imagine a worse group of people to line manage. So rebellious, so free thinking.
Yeah.
Yes, I don't think drug policy reform would go down well on the Tory backbenchers.
But I go back to that point around her as a character. I feel like she doesn't really care. I feel like she's like, I'm going to do all these things and let's see how it goes.
A lot of the things that she's doing are popular on the Tory backbenchers. A lot of these economic reforms, that's what they've been crying for. That's what they
like
live for.
cut stuff. Yeah.
And I guess it would just be interesting to know whether cannabis reform is still an issue that she cares about. Because if it comes down to that, it's about whether she does care.
Sorry,
You can't
because
do
you're not
everything.
wearing your
You can't do
headphones. You can't
Katya's
hear
right.
it.
You can't do everything. You do have to prioritise. And I wonder if I agree. I'm sceptical as to whether it's high enough on her list of priorities. Unfortunately, yeah, she's certainly the best Conservative leader I'd say since David Cameron when it comes to prospects for drug policy reform. Boris Johnson is completely insubstantial man.
Well, it was just a chaotic. It was just chaos. It was just pure chaos.
Chaos.
Everything about Johnson's leadership,
He's
it was
nothing.
just pure chaos.
Marshmallow. He's a political marshmallow.
And it was chaotic turmoil.
It was so
UK.
chaotic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Theresa May, certainly I can imagine is very.
That she did pass the most liberal piece of drug reform we've seen in the UK,
Yeah.
i.e. legalisation of medical cannabis in
Yeah.
2018, which is, I always find quite funny that it was Theresa May
Yeah.
that signed that off. Do you know what I mean? It was her in office that was
Easy.
just like,
Yeah.
oh,
Okay, yeah, I
f-
get
oh,
it.
fine, I'll sign it.
Pretty easy to do it medically, though, isn't it? You've got that, like.
Yeah, but still, I mean, it'd been a conversation around the hat. Do you know what I mean?
No, sure.
Anyway,
I'm not, no,
it was
she deserves credit for it, in the same way that David Cameron deserves credit for doing gay marriage. But, yeah. David Cameron was someone else who, in his youth, he'd talked about drug policy reform. When
yeah.
he
He said in the maiden speech that he was gonna talk.
Yeah, in
about it, address it, but-
2005, when he was running for the leadership,
Yeah.
he himself said, I think we need to look at this. He was part of a Home Affairs Select Committee that slated our drug laws. Never got around to doing it in office. Clearly, was never high up on his priority list. And I think maybe that's probably would ultimately be the reason why nothing ever happened under Liz Truss.
The overarching context of all of this, since I remember first coming into the policy space and working at Volteface 6.5 years ago, and I felt like, and I'm not saying there's a correlation here because that would insinuate some kind of delusion of grandeur, but like I got the job, and then it just seemed to be political turmoil all up until like.
It's all
every
your
year.
fault.
No.
Yeah, that's logical, fella. Is that what? Is that
No, but
post
the
hoc ergo propter hoc, like after this, therefore because of it, or something?
Don't start getting philosophical when we're talking.
I'm not sure, mate. That might be wrong.
I'm a working man. I don't understand what that means. You're saying I've got
No, I also didn't study Latin at school.
The point I'm trying to make is there's political instability all the time, and it creates so much turmoil that makes it harder for issues like cannabis to land and to stick. And it would be great if we could just have a little bit of political stability.
Yeah, can I just say that this is a bit like, do you remember Ian Dowie, the Crystal Palace manager?
Yeah. Catches that with
Oh no, was it?
No.
Or maybe it was Alan Pardew, who someone was like they're consistently inconsistent. It's like you're saying like this like long-term political instability where it's like that sounds pretty stable. Then it's like stably unstable.
Yeah, it's stably unstable,
Like,
but
say-
we
I
need
can't
some
remember what it was.
unstable
Yeah.
stability.
Well,
we-
yeah,
what we
stable instability.
there was a famous football manager who said that they're consistently inconsistent, and that's just a genius phrase.
It's
In
yeah, I
fact,
like
you've done the
that.
same there. You've sort
Yeah.
of summed up our political
Yeah, it is.
crisis
It is
is like
consistently.
stably.
what's
But
the
yeah, it
name?
makes it very difficult to have any kind of strategic vision with policy making and with policy changes.
Yeah, it just needs to calm
They're
down.
all just caught up on the latest crisis.
Yeah.
Taylor
we
Swift
just
once
need-
said,
yeah, we
"Need
just
to calm down."
It needs to. Is that another philosopher?
Yes, she is a philosopher.
Taylor Swift.
I'm a Swiftie.
Modern philosopher.
She is a genius.
But yeah, like political stability would help, and I think Liz Truss plus political stability equals interesting.
I don't think we're going to get political stability.
Yeah, do you
with
think we're
Liz
going to
Truss
get
there.
political stability?
Liz Truss and political stability
Yeah.
are like
I think we're either going to get a nuclear war or political stability. No, well, I'm just being an optimist. I'm just being
what
an
other
optimist.
chaos can really happen that we've had?
Alien invasions. Aliens are going to turn up next. We've had pandemic. We've got threat of nuclear war. I think we're probably going to have some aliens rock up. But anyway,
I think
I
they
think-
should legalize cannabis.
imagine if they can.
Well, look, we were having a discussion the other day. You were saying about does influencing politicians even matter? Is it all about context and structural forces?
Yeah, I was frustrated. I think that day.
You were a bit angry, I think, as well. Yeah, you hadn't had your Diet Coke.
Why would we do this job?
Coke
Zero. Isn't it?
Sorry, Coke Zero. And they don't sponsor us, to be fair. We should probably say that.
I wish I did.
They should.
Yeah, I wish I did. I drink enough of it anyway.
And it was an interesting question, like, because the context has changed so much in the last sort of 6 years, 10 years, whatever, that it is easier for politicians now to point and go, well, look, Germany's doing it, the USA's doing it, Canada's doing it, Uruguay.
Yeah.
Do you know why I'm doing like ASMR? Mexico.
No, it's weird. It's me with the headphones on. It's creeping me out.
Glad I didn't have the headphones on.
So yeah, the point I guess I'm trying to make is it's a lot easier for politicians if they want that crutch of saying, look, we're not an outlier on this anymore. You're not the first person. We're not the first people to do it. And I think that is a really useful tool for politicians to be able to point to when they're trying to
I agree
influence.
completely.
Definitely gonna help.
That's the thing that'll do it. But my thinking there was, right, forget politicians. They're hard work. I've lobbied them to the point of them agreeing fundamentally about the issue. Then they get positions of power and influence and they say, I can't talk about that, which is incredibly demoralising. But I guess my point is that in legal regulated markets, you can just take people and just show, and society just realises that like it's all fine.
Yeah, Sadiq.
That debate I had at the debating site the other day at St Andrews Debating Society, the final closing argument I made was, don't believe the stigma and misinformation. Just look at what's happening in countries
Go
where
to
it's
Canada
legal.
and you'll see
It's
that hell
fine.
hasn't broken loose.
It's fine. It's fine. That's the least of their worries.
They don't do
You know what I
things perfectly.
mean? No, it's not perfect. It's not
There's
perfect at
never
all.
gonna be a perfect
It's not. It's
Agreed.
not perfect.
It's a lot better than
yeah.
what we
Well,
have now.
no, agreed.
It's better than what we've got, and it still has issues. But I think when people hear that argument, they're like, "Oh yeah," and that's my criticism of drug reform to date has made out that like legalization is this like utopia. Oh, we just need to legalize and everything will be fine, or just need to do this. It's
No,
like,
the
well, no,
work-
don't
yeah,
lie
work
to people.
doesn't
People aren't
stop.
stupid. You say to people, "Oh, we legalize cannabis, it'll be fine." No, it won't be fine. You'll have more people using it, and there's an urgent need to like do sensible education programs. And you might see like a lot of people using high strain THC cannabis because it's what they used to be. You can do something about that, but let's not kid people and pretend that it's all just going to be magic and fine.
Yeah, the
But
work
even, I mean,
doesn't stop with legalizing cannabis. That's kind of where it starts.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
we've
like,
seen that
yeah.
with medical cannabis. The,
Yeah.
the work didn't stop when the law got passed. That was
No.
the hard
Certainly-
work only began.
certainly not.
Yeah,
we're very
it's still
busy.
still in the middle of it.
Yeah.
So what are our like? Is there any other? Unless there's any other like key points you wanted to make on that subject, but let's just move. If not, let's move to our like
No, I was trying to
concluding.
rifle through the drugs in my head to try and think if we covered everything. But I think we
Any other drugs to cover?
No, I think that's the main one.
I think good overview. I think the kind of concluding feelings are that it's certainly an interesting time. Like there's certainly angles of opportunity. Is it? Oh my God, Liz Truss is absolutely going to talk about it, and we're going to see a new legal. No, there are absolutely challenges.
I think we're more likely to see it than other
Yeah.
at other points in politics.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately you sort of got to separate recreational cannabis from everything else. I think
Agree. Yeah, yeah,
we've sort
yeah.
of
Different.
talked
Yeah.
through everything else, and I think we're sort
Yeah.
of broadly a bit down on the prospects for anything else really. I guess I can't see things getting any worse. Now that's probably because
That's
they're quite bad
something.
already. But like I can't. I guess to be fair, I did actually talk about the NOS review. I can see that getting worse. But you know, I can't see it substantially getting worse in any other way, really. So that's good. But then on the recreational cannabis side, I think that's where the hope really is. Yeah, look, it's not going to happen today. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen next week. It's not going to happen next year. But I think we're right to say
Yeah.
that this is the best sort of opportunity for a positive discussion to be had about this, and then for positive action to be taken at some point in the short to medium term future, for sure.
Yeah, agree.
I think the best thing is the people that she's surrounded herself with, her sort of political constitution as a politician that she's clearly got, and I think makes her positively predisposed to recreational cannabis. And as we touched on, the sort of compelling conservative case that you can make for recreational cannabis reform, the growth arguments, the stopping wasting police time arguments, the revenues arguments, the freedoms arguments, the Brexit opportunities arguments.
It is a conservative issue, and even when you see it from the angle of protecting young people,
it's only a conservative issue because Labour refused to capitalise on it. It could be a Labour issue.
I just even if Labour did engage with that, I don't think they're in a position where they could do anything sensible about it.
Why?
I think they just eat each other apart.
But I don't think it'd be a huge movement.
Corporations,
yeah.
markets, money, economy, growth.
Yeah, sure. I don't think
they just go. Let's just decriminalise it.
Wes Streeting loves cannabis. You know, I think from the dealings I've had with, from what I've seen him say, you know, clearly he's very conservative on this. Keir Starmer's talked about mental health concerns around cannabis, obviously neglecting to sort of realise or acknowledge that there is mental health concerns, largely the result.
But he does like Germany.
Super high THC strength. Super high strength THC strains that are the result of prohibition.
Yeah.
But he can't critically.
But he does like Germany.
He does like Germany, and you know he's talked extensively about how Labour. You know he's done big photo trips to Germany to meet Olaf Scholz, and talked about how the SDP. I can't remember if it's the SDP or the SPD. One of them,
the Liberal German party.
No, the Social Democrats, Labour's sister party.
That's liberal.
How we're learning from them.
I'm left of centre.
There is a Liberal party in Germany.
Oh, it's literally called a Liberal Party.
Well, I can't remember. They're called the Free Democrats.
I meant like an equivalent of Labour, like a left-leaning.
Yeah, that's what Social Democrats are. That's that Labour's sister party. He's talked loads about how they're learning from them and how great they are. But when it comes to cannabis, no.
Well, we'll see. Maybe he visits in a few years and he's like, oh, okay.
Keir Starmer smoking a joint in Germany. That'd be quite the photo op.
You're like, Keir.
Yeah, maybe.
Cool. I think we're giving it a good overview. Any other thoughts? We're all good?
I'm very pleased with that.
Yeah.
You happy with that? You happy? You all happy? Great. Thanks for watching, whether it be on YouTube, Spotify, or whatever else. And
Let us know what you think.
Yeah, check out the website because Jay's written some good articles on this and we'll keep churning out content on it.
Yeah, we've got a piece. Yeah.
Plug it again.
Listen out. Well, got a few plugs. Listen out for this upcoming podcast with Torin from Centre Think Tank about why centrists should back drug reform. I think that'll be an interesting discussion. It's along sort of similarly political lines. Yeah, I wrote that piece. If you want to know more about Liz Truss and about Suella Braverman on the Tory leadership candidates on drugs, catchy title.
Love it.
That I wrote during the leadership election. And then I've got a piece coming out, well, it may already be out by the time this comes out, with the Myland Institute about why drug policy doesn't exist, but touches on a couple of the things here.
Controversial.
Yeah, read it though.
Well, I mean, no, I agree with the framing. Yeah,
well, I call it an invitation to read. So yeah, have a look for all those things. I also actually shout out to Megan as well, Volteface's new intern.
Our producer, yeah, Megan's producing.
Yeah, audience, you know.
Go follow her.
Follow Megan.
She wrote a great piece of Volteface on Bermuda, and one of Liz Truss's, I presume, was one of her final actions in the Foreign Office, blocking Bermuda's attempts to legalise. Was it legalise? Is it legalise? I forget the details now. But I think it's to legalise cannabis recreation.
And open up like
it was
decriminalised at the moment. Isn't it? Yeah, that's right. It was to have a licensed regulatory framework.
Yeah.
And you know, we were sort of staking a lot on that decision, hoping that, you know, that was a nice opportunity for her to enact some progressive drug reforms that was, you know, that in theory at least are in line with, as I say, her political constitution, that she chose not to take in the end, which is really interesting. And she could have done that, you know, that would never have got any media pickup. It wouldn't have been a big story at all. So I was sort of baffled as to why she didn't pick that up. Allegedly, it was about the UK's obligations under UN drug treaties.
Yeah.
But obviously, we've seen so many signatories to UN drug treaties. Ignore them, basically.
Yeah.
Germany aren't bothered about them when it comes to them legalising cannabis because they make arguments about freedom and whatever else that overrides those treaties ultimately. And, you know, Britain famously over the last few years hasn't been that bothered about following international law. So I think that was more of an excuse than a reason, I think is what I described it as. So definitely go and check out that as well.
Wicked. Cool. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.